So is Jordan Peterson really a Christian? Well, it depends on what you mean by really and what you mean by Christian.
What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God?
But if you've been following Jordan Peterson for any amount of time, you know that he's notoriously difficult to pin down when it comes to this question. And that's probably the most frustrating question that both atheists and Christians have when it comes to Jordan Peterson is, what do you believe about God? Do you really believe in Jesus? Are you a Christian? Well, it looks like we may finally have an answer based on some comments that he recently made on a podcast that he did with skeptic atheist Alex O'Connor. But before we get into that, I wanted to quickly retrace the timeline of Dr. Peterson as well as the different statements that he's made over the past several years that have been the source of so much frustration to Christians and atheists alike on where he really does stand on his belief in God. Now, Jordan Peterson, if you recall, first really went viral after standing up against Bill C-16 in Canada, which was going to put gender identity and expression into protected categories by law. And Peterson's critique of this was that it was tantamount to compelled speech when it came to using preferred pronouns. Then, of course, Joe Rogan got wind of the situation, invited Dr. Peterson on his podcast, and that episode blew up, became one of the most viewed episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience ever. And then in 2017, he introduced his lecture series, The Psychological Significance of the Biblical Stories, going through the book of Genesis and unpacking them from a psychological perspective, sharing what sort of deep mythological truths were embedded in these stories and how they undergirded much of how we understand morality and how we navigate our lives successfully in Western civilization, how we've done so historically, and calling us back to reintegrating those to our modern psyche in order to benefit from them once again. Then in 2018, he followed that up with his 12 Rules for Life book, in which he encouraged people with maxims like pursue what is meaningful and not what is expedient, and to stand up straight with your shoulders back. Then in 2019, 2020, Dr. Peterson takes a bit of a hiatus, which we later find out was related to medical issues he was having as a massive withdrawal syndrome from benzodiazepines. For a while, we weren't really certain if we'd see him again, if he'd pulled through, but he did end up recovering and gradually made his way back onto the scene before releasing his book in 2021, Beyond Order, the follow-up to 12 Rules for Life, and subsequently did another speaking tour based on that. In 2022, he also partnered with the Daily Wire and began releasing his Exodus series, continuing to unpack the Bible, but now he's collaborating with Jewish scholars, Christian scholars from across many denominations, and continues to try to extract the wisdom and value from the Bible for the modern world. Then in 2022, we learned that his daughter Michaela had become a Christian, largely due to her relationship with her now husband, Jordan Fuller. And then in 2024, we find out that Dr. Peterson's wife, Tammy, has converted to Catholicism, and he's present at her confirmation. So that's kind of the timeline that we're operating in with Dr. Peterson, but over the years, he's been asked innumerable times whether he believes in God and whether he considers himself a Christian. And here's a sampling of some of the answers that he's given.
And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived, plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. You know, that's Jungian synchronicity. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. You know, we have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world. But the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, in principle, is supposed to be Christ. But I don't know what to... that seems to me oddly plausible.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what to make of it. It's too... partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't even know what would happen to you if you fully believed it. I think of religious matters a lot. I would consider myself a deeply religious person. I would say, and I have said this before, that I act as if God exists and that I'm terrified that he might. But I don't consider myself an authority on metaphysical issues, and I don't believe that my belief in God is it's not something that seems to me to be fit for... There's something wrong that I can't put my finger on triumphantly declaiming my belief in one manner or another. And so it's something that I prefer to leave in the manner that I've left it. So I act as if God exists. I try to do my best as a person who's obsessed with religious matters. But I'm not willing to place myself conveniently in a box. And so I'm going to leave it at that. I don't like that question. And people have complained at me a lot, and I'm sure they have their reasons because they don't like my answers, you know, and I have two answers. They've kind of become stock, which is not a good thing. But they're the best approximate. I can't figure out why I don't like the question exactly. I had three sort of burgeoning hypotheses. One was, it's none of your damn business. That's the first one. So it's like a privacy issue. Like it seemed to me to be a question that was too private to be answered properly. And so, and you know, you could consider that a cop-out, and maybe it is. And then another one was, well, what do you mean by believe? Like, do you mean the words? Do you mean to say the words, I believe in God? Does that indicate that you believe in God? Like, I don't know what you mean by believe exactly, because... And that's got me in trouble too, because, you know, people think that attempting to clarify the meaning of words is an attempt to escape from the question when it's actually an attempt to specify the question. I mean, is what you believe what you say or what you act out? Now, you know, I would say to some degree it's both, but if push comes to shove, as far as I'm concerned, what you believe is what you act out, not what you say. And then, you know, and if you're an integrated person, then what you act out and what you say are the same thing. And then you're a person whose word can be trusted, right? Because what you say and what you do are isomorphic. They're the same thing. But belief is instantiated in action. So I have also suggested that I act as if I believe in God, or to the best of my ability. And people aren't very happy with that either. And then the third is that I'm afraid that he might exist, which I think is the most comical of the three answers and perhaps the most accurate one. See, the thing about God is that God isn't something you believe in. Or you could say that the way we conceptualize belief in the modern world is shallow. To believe in God is to commit your life. That's what the belief is. It isn't the statement, I believe in God. It says in the Gospels, Christ himself says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Just because you say you believe something, it's like people say all the time that they're Christians. I'm a believing Christian. It's like, that's hard there, buddy. That's the most difficult possible commitment by definition. It's because it's the hoisting of the cross, right? Really, you're going to commit to that, are you? So here's what you're committing to. Painful, unjust death, accompanied by betrayal, the perfidy of the mob, and the dominion of the tyrant. And you're going to welcome that. And that's not all, because Christ harrows hell. That's not all. That's just where it starts. Full confrontation with malevolence. You're going to commit to that, are you?
So it's really interesting, right? Because on the one hand, both Christians and atheists alike, we know what we mean when we ask somebody, do you consider yourself a Christian? Do you believe in God? It's not this overcomplicated thing that Peterson seems to be making it out to be. So it stands to reason that people would be frustrated with his sort of psychologizing of the answer and saying, well, it depends on what you mean by believe. It depends on what you mean by God. It seems like an almost unnecessary amount of avoidance. And yet when you listen to his answers in detail and in good faith, you can tell he takes this question very seriously. He's wrestled with it at length, and he's giving an honest effort to invite you inside his mind in his journey and how he has processed this question over time. And it's interesting that also his answers do seem to have changed a little bit. Now, after Dr. Peterson's wife Tammy converted to Catholicism, Dr. Peterson sat down with Catholic television, and they asked him if he would ever consider becoming a Catholic, and he said this.
I would say it's unlikely, but...
Why do you say unlikely?
I exist on the borders of things. So, why is that? I don't know, but that's how it is.
That's an interesting choice of words, that he exists on the borders of things. And I think it is an apt description of where he lies. We know that he'll engage with Christianity at arm's length and talk about the psychological significance of the biblical stories, about the value of the archetype of Christ, of shouldering the responsibility of being. And he certainly respects Christianity and reveres it in a lot of ways. And yet he's not able to fully identify himself with Christianity or any Christian tradition like Catholicism. But as promised, some recent comments that he made on his own podcast with Alex O'Connor, who I think pressed him better than I've ever seen him been pressed on his own podcast, no less. So props to Alex for getting a little more juice out of the squeeze than anyone else has been able to get. But let's look at what he said on that podcast with Alex O'Connor.
The thing about the resurrection accounts is that they're all, look, so I could say something like this, which will just annoy people, but it doesn't matter. I believe the accounts, but I have no idea what they mean.
When you say you believe the accounts, do you mean, and I hate to be sort of pedantic here, it seems pedantic, but do you mean you believe that these are things that happened such that that's a strange
I
know you don't like that. Let me put it this way. If I went back in time with a Panasonic video camera and put that camera in front of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, would the little LCD screen show a man walk out of that tomb?
I would suspect yes.
So that to me seems like a belief in the historical event of the resurrection, or at least of Jesus leaving the tomb, which means that when somebody says, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead? It doesn't seem clear to me why you're not able to just say, it would seem to me yes.
Because I have no idea what that means. And neither did the people who saw it.
So it looks like Jordan Peterson is holding true to his statement that he exists on the borders of things by keeping an arm's length distance, saying, I have no idea what this means, saying it would seem to me, yes, that Jesus rose from the dead. And yet this certainly does seem to represent a step forward on his journey in his belief or approximation to belief in Jesus. But does this mean that Jordan Peterson is actually a Christian? The honest answer is, I don't know, and neither do you. It seems to me that Jordan Peterson has been on an honest journey to understand reality as it is, to understand the good as it truly is. And that journey has led him to the contours of the person of Jesus Christ. And that journey has led him to see a world that makes sense, that has an all-unifying sort of truth behind it if you look at it through a biblical lens. Dr. Peterson obviously has a very powerful intellect, and he's able to think very, very deeply about issues and able to conceptualize things at much higher levels of resolution than the average person. And I think that that's something that is both leading him to faith and an obstacle to coming to faith, because he's overly intellectualizing everything, and yet his ability to grasp very profound, deep concepts and look at things from a very deep perspective is also what is causing him to see the outline of biblical truths and of the truths of the person of Jesus Christ looming over all of it. I did another video about Russell Brandon, and in that one he talked about how an eerily familiar figure kind of was looming over his entire journey toward Christ. And I think that that eerily familiar figure is also looming over Jordan Peterson's entire life work, his entire journey of understanding how people find meaning, of what the purpose in life is, of how to live a life that is good, that makes the world a better place. I think Jordan Peterson has dug as deep as there is to dig and has come face to face increasingly with the reality that there is no answer beyond Christ. There is no answer more profound and more all-encompassing than what you're going to get in the biblical narratives. In the way he would say it, that's the underlying structure of reality itself that you're coming face to face with. And I think that that is a terrifying prospect, because if it is all true, then now you are face to face with God. Now, one thing that I have heard from many Christians talking about Jordan Peterson is that something you don't hear is that typical Christian experience where you're kind of arrested by your own sense of sinfulness and your desperate need for a Savior, and overwhelmed by the love of God in Christ, and filled with gratitude and a desire to serve Him and worship Him explicitly. That's not necessarily the picture that you're getting on Jordan Peterson's conversion experience, if we can call it that. And yet you do detect a sincerity to what Dr. Peterson's going through, and he is certainly saying increasingly ultimately the right things. So ultimately, it's not for me or any of us to judge where Dr. Peterson's heart truly is at when it comes to his journey and his relationship with God and whether he truly is a Christian. But in the meantime, I think Dr. Peterson has been enormously helpful to atheists and Christians alike, many like me, who have grown up in the church and in Christian traditions and are familiar with all these things, and yet we've somehow missed a lot of their profound significance. We've failed to appreciate the profound impact that Christian narratives and story have had on shaping our collective psyche and have had on shaping our culture. Dr. Peterson has really helped unpack the ways in which Christianity is the water in which we're swimming psychologically and culturally, and we've very much taken for granted a lot of the morality and the conceptualizations of goodness and evil and the sort of dramatic way in which we view ourselves and find meaning in the world. A lot of that is painted onto the Christian story in the Western world, and we've taken that for granted, and Dr. Peterson has helped extract that and make it articulate once again. And I think that's a massive service to all of us. Of course, as a Christian, I think ultimately Dr. Peterson's pursuit of truth will lead him closer and closer to the person of Christ, who said, "I am the way and the truth and the life." So in that sense, I'm optimistic that he'll continue on this path that his wife, his daughter, and many others in his intellectual space, like Ayaan Hirsch Ali and Russell Brand and Tom Holland, is somewhere on that journey. Douglas Murray is on that journey. Andrew Huberman's recently spoken about his faith in God. Candace Owens, a lot of prominent figures now are being very open about the fact that they're either coming to full belief or very much on the path and contending with this in a way that they hadn't before. If nothing else, I think that it's clear that something deep within Dr. Peterson has been awakened to the transcendent, has been awakened to a sense of an all-unifying truth, a deep reality that undergirds everything, and the fact that he trembles at that prospect, I think, is a good thing. So I guess ultimately it remains to be seen whether Dr. Peterson is still in the realm of conceptualizing things and trying to discern the truth from everything that he sees, or whether he's really crossed into the threshold of personal faith in Christ and true identification as a Christian. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Jordan Peterson is a Christian? Do you think he's still on his way to becoming a Christian? Do you think he's not a Christian? I'm also curious to hear where you're at in your journey. Are you someone who considers yourself a Christian 100%? Are you someone who's existing on the borders of things like Jordan Peterson is? Or are you someone who's totally on the outside looking in, rolling your eyes at this? I'd love to hear your thoughts and where you're at on your own journey as well. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.